Yo, what's good? In today's video, we'll be going over how to maximize your DPS on every boss as an Unholy DK in the Throne of Thunder raid. I apologize for the delay in getting this video out as I was waiting for Warcraft logs to finally release some rules for the raid to avoid making any recommendations or parses if the rules were going to release, and because parsing to start the phase was cringe and a mega grief anyway on multiple bosses. But without further ado, let's move on to getting you to the top of the damage meters. Jin'rokh. For this fight, it's most important to maximize your cooldowns around the damage amp debuff called Fluidity that you get from standing in the giant pool that forms on the group about 40 seconds into the fight. You get 40% increased damage while standing in the pool, which is massive, but it unfortunately doesn't benefit Gargoyle or Army, but your group should be saving lust for this anyway, so it's still best to save Army and Gargoyle for this. So, the most optimal setup for this fight is to do the following. Trinket swap, or remove and re-equip your Brutal Talisman about 40 to 45 seconds pre-pull to put it on ICD so it doesn't proc to start the fight. We're trying to align this with the moment the pull forms. Pre-pot at 10 seconds left on the pull timer so we have it back up for when Gargoyle flies down during the pull. Use AMS for the first static burst that goes out about 10 seconds into the fight for some free renew power. Save all your CDs, Snap Springs, Lifeblood, if you're Herbalism, your Racial, and Unholy Frenzy for the pull. Don't use them on pull. When you see Jin'rokh start casting the first Thundering Throw, start summoning your army to maximize army uptime during Lust, since the pool starts forming after the tank gets stunned from being thrown. Use Death's Advance or Nitro boosts as the tank moves to Jin'rokh to the pool being formed. Summon your Gargoyle once you're positioned in the pool, and pray and hope your next Feather proc aligns with Brutal Talisman and Follow Crusader. We want everything to align for a Giga Snap here, since we can actually snapshot the 40% damage debuff Fluidity since it's a player debuff. And then I prefer using Unholy Blight here personally, and cancel Auring it if Feather gets to 10 stacks, but Plague Strike or Outbreak works just as well if you chose to use Unholy Blight on pull. Make sure you use AMS just before Jin'rokh casts Ionization, so you avoid getting the debuff since you'd have to run out of the pool if you get it to avoid wiping the raid. Ideally, the boss dies shortly after the pool despawns, and this should more and more be the case as the phase continues and your raid continues to get more gear. It is most beneficial for your DPS and your parse if the boss dies just as the pool is despawning, so hope your raid has the damage to do this. If not, just use AMS and IBF to live through the lightning storm, unless you're going to get a second pool in which you would save your next AMS for the next ionization. Horridon. Horridon doesn't count for boss all-star points or complete damage rankings, but if you want that pink number, this fight is cheese, since technically, it's best to let the fight drag out to all 4 doors, to maximize the stacking boss debuff Cracked Shell, where the percent damage he takes goes up after each door charge by 50%, stacking up 200% by the 4th door. This might not be true late into the phase in full BIS, but we had logs like this one before the rules and partition went out, and it's kind of lame in my opinion. But if your guild isn't a parsing guild, and you kill it like most normal guilds, and lust the 2nd or 3rd door to skip some doors, here's how I would min-max the fight for a chance at a 99. Use Rolling Blood for easier disease spread to the adds. Hopefully the ad take is bringing these adds close enough into the boss, since Horridon's hitbox is a bit funky and hard to spread from. Use Blood Boil when there are 2 or more adds close to the boss, especially early on before the first Cracked Shell debuff goes out. Save all CDs aside from Snap Springs on pull, and hold them for after Horridon charges the first door and gets the first Cracked Shell debuff. Send Gargoyle and your CDs once it goes out, since Gargoyle does benefit from this debuff. You should still get a second Gargoyle if your group is lusting and killing Horridon after the 3rd door charge. Save your army for just before Lust, and stop spamming Blood Boil on adds after the second Cracked Shell debuff. It's still probably worth throwing out 1 or 2 to spread diseases, but no more after that. You can't snapshot the debuff in your diseases since it's on the boss, unfortunately. If your kill times get fast enough to kill the boss after the 2nd door charge, or your kill time is closer to 4.5 minutes, then you can rip Gargoyle on pull, so you still get 2 of them. Other than that, you can AMS throughout the fight on things like the Sand Traps from the Waste Walkers, the Venom Puddles during the 2nd door, or the Frozen Orbs from the Frozen Warlords. Just be careful not to take too many ticks of damage, since these do hurt and eat through AMS pretty quick. Council of Elders. Parsing on Council is pretty simple and straightforward in my opinion. I think it's best to run Rolling Blood and get as many Blood Boils out as possible. It's worth Blood Boiling as long as you can hit at least 3 of them with it. I don't think it's worth if you happen to only have 2 in range, or you're down to only 2 Elders towards the end of the fight if they're not being cleaved evenly. Hopefully though, your ranged aren't griefing by standing too far out, so Khazredin stays rolling around in range for cleave, but the best strat is keeping all 4 elders grouped together as much as possible and cleaving them down. You can almost AMS on cooldown for more runic power throughout the fight, with all the AoE damage going out, like from Khazredin's Discharge, Sul's Sandstorm, or Marley's Twisted Fate. You can also stand in the sand traps for a few ticks of the AMS. Another big factor here is making sure you're getting out as many Soul Reapers as possible once each Elder is in execute phase. This should happen pretty early into the fight with the raid burning down Soul to start. You can use a mouse over macro to Soul Reaper whichever Elder is low enough if you're having to focus another Elder through empowerment if the Elder you're targeting isn't in execute. So, to summarize, Blood Boil with 3 or more Elders in range, Soul Reaper as much as possible, and AMS almost on cooldown throughout the fight. Maintain your diseases in all 4 elders, and rip army pre-pull for lust, along with all CDs to start the fight. Don't worry too much about your snaps. Your original snap to start will likely get overwritten because of rolling blood, just with how much the elders move, unless you sit literally on top of Sul to start. Tortos. I'd recommend using Desecrated Ground and Glyph of IBF along with Rolling Blood. Desecrated Ground and IBF allow you to immune the stuns from Quake Stomp, so with the Glyph of IBF you should be able to immune nearly every Quake Stomp if you alternate between them on each stomp. Shout out to my man Ron for sharing this tech. I only recommend Rolling Blood to spread diseases to the Whirling Turtles as they path through the boss, and eventually this will be obsolete for some groups since they'll just end up dying too quick for your disease ticks as the phase goes on and your raid group gets more gear. In theory though, you should be able to Fester Blight this boss. Just be careful if you're using Rolling Blood to not overwrite your original snap when spreading to the turtles. If you time it just right, you should be able to spread to your diseases to all 3 turtles with just 1 Blood Boil. Don't worry about touching the bats now that they have been removed from damage on logs. Make sure you AMS after every Quake Stomp for additional runic power. Most groups are lusting on pull though, so army pre-pull and use all CDs. You're not likely going to get a second gargoyle since most groups are now killing Tortos in 3 minutes or under, and kills will only get faster as the phase goes on. Also, hopefully you have a bunch of snowballs because you should be using them on the crystals for the debuff so that you don't waste runes or runic power. You can use this macro to hit the crystals and get the debuff really easily. So, keys to this fight are maintaining your original snap with the Fester Blight playstyle. A link to the video on Fester Blight will be somewhere on the screen here if you need a refresher. Spreading diseases to the Whirling Turtles with the Blood Boil as they're moving through Tortos. Immuning the stuns from Quake Stomp by rotating Desecrated Ground and IBF. And then abusing AMS for runic power once the rock falls start falling after Quake Stomp. Megaera. Since damage done to Netherworms don't count anymore, I'd recommend just using Unholy Blight since you won't really benefit from Rolling Blood or Plague Leech. You could, in theory, Plague Leech for extra runes while each head sits at 0% for they die, but this is also a relatively small window. Either or would be fine, I just personally prefer using Unholy Blight. Save your army for lust and try to cast army in between heads. My raid group has been lusting on the 5th head, so I typically army right after the 4th one dies and the 5th head is just about to spawn in. You can AMS during each rampage after a head dies and the raid stacks together for tons of free runic power. This also just helps your healers out while they're working to keep the raid topped. The heads already die pretty quickly and they will only die quicker as the phase goes on, so this makes it difficult to get the full value out of your gargoyle. That said, it's still most beneficial to make sure you have a gargoyle available during lust, whether your group does it on pull or later in the fight. I always gargoyle on pull and save my second one for the 5th head during lust. Don't worry too much about disease snaps since the heads already die pretty quickly. Focus more on squeezing additional Soul Reapers in on each head by trying to time the moment each head crosses 45% if you have your 4-piece tier set. I would try throwing a Soul Reaper out at around 50 to 55%, but the time will vary depending on your raid group's damage output and gear. Most weak cores for Soul Reaper won't be able to accurately tell you when to Soul Reaper, given how fast the heads are dropping in HP, so this will take some judgment on your part. So the more Soul Reapers you're able to squeeze in on the heads throughout the fight, the better, but that's pretty much all there is to min-maxing Megaera. Ji-kun. Ji-kun doesn't count for ASP, but if you want your 99, it's going to largely be dependent on your raid group's ability to cheese the primal nutrient buffs, how well your group clears out the nest before the brown buffs hit the nest, and how much your fire mages can pump with the buff. As Unholy, it's best to either start in the first nest and allow everyone else to clear the nest to avoid proccing your trinkets before you get the primal nutrient buff as you're flying back up, or to send army and gargoyle on the boss since they don't benefit from the percent damage buff. because Blizzard hates pet classes, and be assigned a drop to the second nest for your first buff. The other reason it's more beneficial to go in the first or second nest groups is because this allows you an opportunity to also grab the primal nutrient buff by soaking one of the green globs on the next feed young after you've tamed it from one of the brown ones from flying from the nest. You can snapshot the primal nutrient buff in your diseases, and if you execute this perfectly, you can actually snapshot 2 stacks of the primal nutrient buff for 200% increased damage on your diseases, but you only have about a 4-second overlap to do this, so it's pretty hard to pull off if your group doesn't execute the cleaning the nest very well. You'll have to ignore what Thoji's weak aura is telling you, since the weak aura kind of freaks out once you get your second primal nutrient buff. So for these reasons though, Ji-kun's probably my least favorite fight, but luckily it's not part of your ASP. Durumu. I recommend doing the Fester Blight playstyle on Durumu and maintaining your Giga Snap the entire fight, but I recommend running Rolling Blood instead of the typical Unholy Blight talent for Fester Blight. The reason for this is because Ice Wall damage still counts towards your damage, and because the hitbox in Durumu doesn't properly spread her diseases to the walls when you Blood Boil, it's very easy to avoid overriding your snapshot as long as you're standing close to Durumu when you're using Blood Boil. Our diseases unfortunately only spread to the outermost ice walls, whether you Blood Boil or Pestilence anyway, so I only recommend throwing out 1 or 2 Blood Boils just to spread your diseases. Ice walls will die quicker as your group gets more gear and the phase goes on anyway, so damage is pretty minimal, but it's still enough of a factor to make it worth spreading our diseases to some of the walls. There are still plenty of opportunities for more runic power with AMS throughout the fight. This in turn helps you maintain your original snapshot by also getting you more blood tap stacks for additional festering strikes as needed. You can AMS any of the beams as you're standing in them while you're rotating around the room. You can also AMS the purple puddles on the ground left from lingering gaze, and you can AMS the purple fire on the ground as your group navigates the maze. If you happen to get hit by a force of will on accident, you can Goblin Glider back down before you hit the outer wall if you're a gamer. Other than that, just use Army pre-pull since most groups should be lusting on pull, use Gargoyle on CD, and do everything in your power to make sure you don't drop your original snapshot if you manage to get all your procs on pull. Primordius. Primordius doesn't count for ASP either, and the fight is a bit of a joke for Unholy since the debuffs you get from mutating don't help your Gargoyle or Army, and you just have to pad the uses to parse. So just run Rolling Blood and spam Blood Boil to spread your diseases to as many of the oozes as you can while you're moving around the room with Primordius after fully mutating. Of course, high rolling on the debuffs you receive from mutating helps as well, but that's about all I'll cover for Primordius since it's just such a cheese and RNG fight. Padding is boring and lame, and you won't be able to pad much depending on how many Affliction Warlocks your group is running either. Dark Animus. Whether you use Unholy Blight or Rolling Blood in this fight depends on the strategy your group is using. I think it'll become BIS to just burn the boss and ignore the ads like a few groups are already doing, since you can get a 2-minute or faster kill if your group is able to execute this. It'll become easier to do as the phase continues and your group gets more gear, of course. If your raid does do this, I'd think you just run Unholy Blight since you're ignoring the ads anyway. If not, use Rolling Blood to spread your diseases to as many of the Anima Golems as possible, since these are the only ads that count towards your damage. Most groups are lusting on pull or earlier into the fight, so if you're assigned to sit the boss, just Army pre-pull. If not, Army early once you've swapped to the boss for some lust up time. Be careful about when you're using Army, since Pet Follows is bugged still and doesn't cause your Army to swap targets anymore. Use your AMS constantly for additional runic power by soaking some of the Anima fonts, and for when interrupting jolts go off if your group gets any. Ignore the large and massive Anima Golems since damage to these don't count to your parse anymore. Pray and hope you don't get targeted for any matter swaps. If you do, just use IBF to help survive, and then use Nitro Boost or Death's Advance to get back to the boss as quickly as possible. I could foresee this fight being removed from ASP down the road, but we'll see. Ironcon. This fight is tricky because your parse and DPS will largely depend on your group's ability to burn Quetzal, the second dog, down to 25% to skip the Windstorm. If your group is unable to do this, it'll be much harder for you to parse. Groups are still able to do this without vengeance cheesing by bringing the trash in the boss, so your group has to be able to do this to compete right now. It will become easier to do as the phase continues and your group gets more gear. If your group is saving lust to do the skip, only use Synapse Springs on pull and then save your Army and Gargoyle along with the other CDs to ensure your group makes the skip. Use Army a few seconds before Quetzal flies in and your group sends lust. Pray and hope your Feather and Brutal Talisman procs align here for your Disease Snap and after you send your Gargoyle as well. I recommend doing Fester Blight on the dogs to extend your diseases longer since they will continue to tick after they fly away during each phase transition. You can see this from this log I managed to get about 2.25 million extra disease damage on Roshock after he flew away. Make sure you also hit Ironcon with a Plague Strike each time he drops down from one of the dogs as well, since he also takes ticks even after he jumps back on another one of the dogs. There are also tons of AMS opportunities throughout the fight for additional runic power. You can AMS Unleash Flames while Rorschach is up, the Freeze debuff after it goes off in the raid group while Quetzal is up, and the Pulsing Flame damage from the Hurricane in the last phase. Do everything in your power to ensure you don't get the Frost debuff from the Frost lines on the ground when they go out. Hopefully your tank's a homie and moves the boss to help you with this. Once all 4 dogs are out, I recommend using Rolling Blood and then just spamming Blood Boils as long as it hits at least 3 of them. Make sure you're getting as many Soul Reapers out as possible while each of the dogs are dying as well. 1 Empyreans. I recommend using Unholy Blight here since there's no point in spreading diseases to the lurkers since damage to them no longer counts. Also, we'll be doing Fester Blight and Lulin since diseases continue to tick even after she despawns. But many groups are going to end up killing Lulin before she despawns now as well, which is still nice for being able to keep your snap the whole kill. Make sure you open on Suin with an Outbreak before she disappears on pole, so your diseases continue to tick while she's hidden. Pre-pull Army if your group less on pole, and then send all CDs and hope for all procs for a Giga Snap so that you can Fester Blight. Save your AMS for when Suin appears and channels Tears of the Sun for some runic power, and make sure you drop Death and Decay plus Pestilence to respread diseases to Suin while she's out. Avoid the green clouds floating around while you're killing Lulin at all costs. I recommend being almost max melee range, so you have more time to dodge any clouds that come through the boss, since they're kind of difficult to see when people are stacked. Your shamans can use a Trim Totem to help you out if you end up getting hit and put to sleep by any of the green clouds. But once the day phase starts and Suin appears, you can AMS the fire trails she leaves behind from Flames of Passion, and the pulsing AoE damage going out constantly from Blazing Radiance, so there's plenty of opportunities to abuse AMS for runic power during the day phase. Make sure you don't send any Death Coils while she's channeling Nuclear Inferno though, as she's immune to any damage during this. Utilize your Depths Advance and Nitro boosts to min-max some more uptime before you run to hide behind one of the comments. Other than that, make sure you're squeezing in as many Soul Reapers as possible once Lulin and Suin are in execute phase. You can squeeze in extra Soul Reapers by using it just before Suin starts casting Nuclear Inferno and goes immune. It will still explode and do damage even if it goes off after she starts channeling. Your diseases also continue to tick while she's channeling as well. Lei Shen. I recommend using Rolling Blood just for being able to fit as many Blood Boils in on the Ball Lightnings as possible, since they're the only added damage that currently counts. They do need to die quickly as well, since the outgoing raid damage from them is a lot if they're left alive too long and they start bouncing around, especially during the final phase. Of course, this will matter a bit less and less as the phase goes on and your raid gets more gear, but for now, all the top parses for Unholy have high amounts of Ball Lightning damage. I'd also recommend replacing your Glyph of Pestilence with Glyph of Dark Sim, so you can use more Dark Sims on the Harness powers that spawn throughout the fight when bouncing bolts aren't soaked. Your group should be allowing these to spawn anyways, so your tanks get more Vengeance to speed up the kill. The buff that you're trying to get is a 25% damage buff called Amplifier. Since it's an instant cast though, it's pretty RNG in the timing, but you just need to cast Dark Sim on the Harness powers before they cast it. I recommend using this mouse over macro on them. If you end up getting it, you will need to hit Dark Sim again to get the buff on yourself if you manage to successfully steal it. Ideally, your raid group has 2 DKs or Mass Grips on the Ball Lightnings. I would save an Unholy Rune for Death and Decay, so you can drop it just before they're gripped in, and then spam all your Death Runes on Blood Boil for as much Ball Lightning damage as possible. You can throw out some Festering Strikes before they spawn to make sure you convert your Blood and Frost Runes to Death Runes ahead of time. This is key for maximizing Ball Lightning damage. Most groups should be saving Lust for the final phase, so I recommend casting Army in the few seconds leading up to the final phase transition to avoid downtime once Lei Shen becomes attackable. Save your second potion for Lust here, and send all CDs. There are many different opportunities through this fight to AMS for runic power as well. You should be able to AMS every single Thunderstruck Lei Shen cast since it lines up perfectly with the 45-second CD. You should get a whole runic power bar from each of these. I recommend saving AMS in the final phase for these as well, with all the chaos and damage going out. You can also use AMS when lightning whips go out by standing on the lines left on the ground. Just be sure to take at least 1 tick of damage from it before you press AMS to gain runic power. Horridon. This is the ultimate Fester Blight fight and great for practicing and improving at figuring out how many Festering Strikes it takes to maintain your snap the entire fight. This fight is the closest to being a patchwork fight in my opinion, so this makes it easier to focus on maintaining your snap and working on not hitting too many Festering Strikes so you can optimize for more Scourge Strikes without dropping your snap. I personally prefer using Unholy Blight in this fight since I don't think you get much value out of Rolling Blood for spreading their Crackling Stalkers, and this will be especially true since they'll die quicker as the phase progresses. That said, you should be making sure you're spreading your disease with Pestilence and then dropping Death and Decay when the Stalkers come out. You can use this Soul Reaper mouse over macro to try to time getting a Soul Reaper off on the ad as well for additional Soul Reapers. Many groups are lusting on pull now, so pre-pull army and send everything on pull if that's the case. Some groups might lust toward the end of the fight though when the outgoing raid damage is highest, so save your army for then if your group is lusting later. Ideally, your sign is one of the last people to move out with the Vita debuff and you end up not having to move out and lose uptime on the boss. If you do end up going out, you can AMS before the debuff goes off for a full bar of runic power. You can also try to time AMS for when the Crackling Stalkers cast Crackle on the raid group for more runic power before the phase transition at 40%. Once you transition past 40% though, you can pretty much AMS on cooldown for runic power with the damage from Ruin ticking every 2 seconds. You should be able to get almost 2 full runic power bars with AMS if you're able to dump death coils quick enough. For timing your disease snap, I generally try to make sure I have about 40 seconds or so remaining on my diseases once the transition past 40% happens, and then I go back to the normal rotation and only send festering strikes for converting my frost and blood runes like normal. This seems to align well for maintaining my snap just long enough to avoid using too many festering strikes and losing out on additional scourge strikes, but this can of course vary depending on how quickly your group is able to burn the boss down from 40 to 5% and how much Horridon heals during this phase. But with that, this concludes my guide on how to maximize your damage and parse on all bosses in Throne of Thunder as an Unholy DK. If you made it this far into the video, please know I genuinely appreciate your support and for taking the time to watch. Also, I am considering making another more complete and updated guide on the Festerblight rotation. If you think this would be a helpful video to you, please let me know in the comment section below.